Good morning, everyone, and welcome to, finally, after a long time, it's been a while since I've done one of these, a new episode of Scooter's World, coming to you live from the Granville Guitars World Headquarters, for now, here in lovely St. Petersburg, Florida. Today is August the 3rd, 2023. And on the bench today, we have a Fender Showman amp, late 60s sometime. We're going to look at the dates here and figure that stuff out. This was sent to me through the mail as a reverb purchase from a customer who wanted it checked over and had the usual servicing before he gets it. It's going into a studio, and now that's his main concern. He wants it studio ready. So we're going to be very particular about all aspects of performance here. And, as you can see, there's the usual, dings, dents, ticks, chips in the Tolex for an amp that's, 55 plus years old or however old it is. I think it's a 66. I've already had it apart a bit and evaluated it some. There's some there's some interesting things going on inside that we're going to address. So if this kind of thing interests you, long drawn out shots of amplifiers and me droning on endlessly, well, first off, God help you, and second of all, thanks for tuning in. If you find this interesting, hang out, and I'll show you what's going on, and I'll show you what we're going to do for it, so he can have this thing in his studio doing what it needs to do. All right, so let's go ahead and have a look at the inside, shall we? Okay, before we move along here, we can see that the tube chart is intact and has the information that we'd like to have. It's a number 6 production, and the letter stamp is NJ. That is going to, I think it's 64, which would follow. I think it's a 64. I said 66 earlier, but I think it's a 64. Also, there's the ink stamp in the bottom of the cabinet, which I'm going to try and show you. Hang on here. Come on, focus. Looks like NA4164, if y'all can see that. I hope you can see it. Yeah, there should be, that stamp should also be inside the chassis somewhere. At least it usually is. And we'll check for that here in a minute. But tube chart is present, and that's a good thing. So we're looking at 64, I think. All right, there it is, right there on the chassis. NA4164. So what that tells us is that this chassis and that cabinet left the factory together. So that's a good thing. Okay, we're on the underside of the chassis right now. We can see that this amp has had a cap job done to it, but it happened a long time ago. These caps are about 23 or 24 years old. I think the dates on them are 01. They're under load. They're acting a little bit strange. Honestly, I'm not a fan of the Spragues anyway. Over time, I've learned to just appreciate more what the F&Ts do. I think Spragues are a little bit stiffer overall, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But a few years back, there was a significant controversy with fake Spragues, and I personally installed about half a dozen Spragues that blew up in short order. And that was no fun. That was a bit embarrassing, honestly. So just out of superstition, I just pull them. Is that a little unenlightened, pig ignorant maybe on my part? Maybe, but I've just come to really enjoy the F&Ts and what they do. So let's see here. Can we see the transformer date codes? Okay, they're upside down. Stand by. Just going to flip this around. All right. We can see the power transformer date code here if we look carefully. It says CSA up top. I'm told that is a Canadian thing. CSA. Never have verified if that's correct, but if we look closely at this number, 125P34A, that's the correct power transformer for this amp. 606436. Sorry, I got off frame there. 606 manufacturer code, and 4 is the second digit of the year, 38 being the week. So this was made in the 38th or 36th, it looks like, actually, week of 1964. Okay, come over here. That is the choke right there again. 606 434. So that was made within a few weeks of the power transformer. That is a choke, 125C. That's the correct one. Output transformer. That number is on the right side. Let's see if we can get over here and show that number. Get the power cable out of the way. There's the number right there. 125A, 30A, 606436. This was made the same week as the power transformer. That's pretty cool. So this is a 1964. You can see the Sprague caps on the underside here, the other side rather. This was good work. Whoever did this did it righteous. And they actually made themselves some correct notes at the one end to indicate the resistor. Right here is 4.7K, and they've got that noted. And then a 1K here, they've also got that noted. And then which wires go to which points. And this is a negative end of this cap right there. It's a totem pole with these two here. So, sometimes you just see positive, negative indicators, stuff like that. I tend to always work from a schematic. That way I never get lost. And I don't typically have to write that stuff down. But if you're in a hurry and, those are good notes to have there. That's going to tell us what we need to know. So those are getting changed. It's time. 20-year-old caps, even 20-year-old caps of very high quality, you still, particularly for studio work like this is going to be used for, you want the highest standard of cleanliness in your power handling, which is exactly what these guys do. And, it's had some other work done to it that was kind of questionable, and we'll see that stuff here in just a moment. Okay, back around here we can see one added hole, which I believe might have been a master volume. I'm not really sure. There are some interrupted solder joints in that area at the front of the amp. So you also notice that the vibrato pedal jack is a 1/4-inch jack. They've done a mod to this thing, which is not a bad idea, I suppose. They've put a 1/4-inch switching jack in it and added a switch to that last potentiometer up there, if you can see that. That's the intensity pot for the tremolo, and what it does is if there's nothing plugged into the jack, that allows you to push, pull, or pull out on that to turn the tremolo on and off without a foot switch. Seems like a lot of trouble to go to me, but it's there. I don't know if it works yet. If it does, I'll probably just leave it in place. The original pot's gone, so it really doesn't matter that much. Anyway, let's see other things here. There's been a fair amount of work done to it throughout the amplifier. You can see those metal films added for the normal channel slope resistor and also the normal channel preamp plate resistors, which are, there is your slope resistor, and there's your plate resistors for the preamp. I'm probably going to change those out. I think that metal films in that position are a little bit stale sounding, a little bit hard. I like to use carbon films there, which are just slightly warmer. But I don't like to use carbon comps because they're a little on the noisy side and can cause problems eventually. We got our blue sausages here. Bass cap, mid cap. There's your treble, that little ceramic guy there. These are a big deal. All of these blue sausages, you want to, particularly the tone stacks. These are the tone stack for your normal channel, and these right here are the tone stack for the tremolo channel. Those are pretty important. Those guys have a lot to do with the sound of this amp. I'm willing to put up with a little bit of grit and noise when a pot gets turned. As long as those guys are still working, I'll leave them in place. Let's see here. We've got our the normal channel first preamp cathode resistor and capacitor, which is this one here. These have been changed out. Obviously, those are not original. They may or may not be good. I'm probably just gonna go ahead and replace them. Like I said, when an amp is destined for studio use, you kind of want to eliminate all sorts of little things that might, crop themselves up. These two will definitely get yanked. Those are Illinois. They're very unreliable in these kind of situations, and I would not feel good about leaving them in there. As we move down the amp, we can see a few more. There's another metal film. Actually, that's a metal oxide right there. More metal films up here. And then down here, once we get to the phase inverter grid resistors, which are these guys right here. Those are not a bad choice. Those are carbon films. And then you've got this fireproof metal oxide in the center of it all, which, I don't know. You use what you have sometimes, and I get that, but I just soon use what I like to use most of the time. Phase inverter plate resistors are down here. Those guys are metal oxides. Those are probably okay. Metal oxides tend to last and last and last. I think those are metal oxides. Yeah, those are metal oxides. And up there on the bias splitter resistors, you can't really see them. They're tucked in up there. Those are also metal oxides. Those things tend to last and last and last. And in a power supply situation, a high voltage situation like that, it can be a good thing. Bias cap was changed with something cheap. I'm going to get rid of that. Probably going to change the resistor as well. Even though it's low voltage, it's still a carbon comp and has likely lost some of its capabilities over the years. Those are good RCA diodes for the rectifier. Probably leave all those in place. No need to change them unless they're just bad. We'll test them under high voltage and see how they're behaving. And I'll likely leave the other old RCA in there for the bias supply, which is this one right here. This is for your bias supply. And these are all for the rectifier, that 6 up there. Now here's an interesting thing, and I noticed this when I plugged it in. Well, I didn't plug it in, when I opened it up. You'll see that cap there for the bias supply. The positive is connected to ground. It's supposed to be connected to ground because that's what you do with a bias supply cap. It's dealing with negative voltages. But down here, that cap right there, which is the vibrato cathode resistor and capacitor, if I can zoom in on it, you'll notice that it's backwards. You can tell, if you don't know how to tell this, the top of the beer can is the positive end. And here it's connected to ground. That thing is backwards. So I'm looking at the schematic here. That's a cathode resistor and cap. Basically, that will transform this into a resistor. And that is no bueno, particularly in that position of the amp. I'm sure the amp sounded a little weird as a result of that little problem right there. So that cap is going to get replaced, and I'm going to make sure the polarity is correct, and that part of the amp will be happy. Now let me shift again here. Actually, I'm going to pause for a second and flip it around. Okay, down here we've got our preamp tubes, input tube for the normal channel. All this wire looks nice and clean and looks solid. I'll leave this stuff in place unless something's acting up. This old solid core wire, after a time, particularly if it's been monkeyed about a bit, can have problems. Now, let's move our light a little bit. I'll show you some stuff when we get down here. You can see some replaced screen grid resistors, and these are questionable and will be coming out. This is V5 here, which is a 6L6. That is a 1 watt carbon film, and that is not, you need a lot more than that. I'm going to replace that with a 5 watt ceramic. Those guys get hammered on, and they fail a lot. These are not original. Someone's replaced these. You can see your swamping resistors, your grid stoppers, as they're called, down underneath. I'm going to replace those too. They're not an inappropriate type or value, but they've been there a while, and some of this work is not that good. There's some clumpy solder joints and some scary stuff here that we're going to show in just a minute. Now you get down here to the other 2 tubes, down to your V7 and V8. Let's get this B plus out of the way here. You can see that they replaced those screen grids with 3 watt flame proofs, and also the grid stoppers on the underside as well on those 2 tubes. Those are appropriate for that. Still going to replace them. You want all 4 of those to kind of agree with each other and be the same value-wise and the same power handling, so that all 4 of these tubes kind of agree with each other. That's fairly important. And there's also some mains wiring nonsense that's going on here. I never use these mains, the courtesy plug, as it's called, the jack here that allows you to plug AC into the back. I never use this. Okay, you shouldn't use it. I don't care what anybody says. Use a power strip. Plug in somewhere else. A high voltage tube amp, this is not a good place to plug in anything. So I always wire around it. And I always take the black wire straight to the fuse holder, which they've done here through that jack. So when they rewired this, that's exactly what they did. And that's, in my mind, that's ideal, because that way, if anything at all goes wrong with the amp for any reason, that fuse is going to blow. It's going to protect the amplifier. And it's a big enough value fuse that it should protect that. Now, where was the burnt bit here? Let me see if I can push these filament wires out of the way. You can see it. There's been some questionable soldering right there. See this clumpy bit? That's actually that's your B plus. That's pin 3, and that solder is pretty bad. And you can see here on the chassis where it has actually arced to the chassis. That is no bueno, and that has to be cleaned up. That's carbon. Okay, that is now a conductor, a very good one, and you got to clean that. I like to clean areas like that until you feel like you could lick them. You know, it should be that clean. It should be that free of that black stuff. And once that's okay, then we're good. I'm probably going to replace these filament wires. If you look right here where I'm pointing, you can see where the insulation has started to fray. And that's also no bueno. If these two wires short together, you got a problem. So I'm probably going to replace all the filament wires up to the that guy right there, which is your phase inverter tube. I'll probably replace it from here all the way back, just to be safe. The preamp tube filament wires typically don't have the same issues. And it looks fairly clean up there. I'm not sure why it's got damage at one end and not the other. You know, it's higher voltage, higher power down here, so there's a lot more chances for things to go awry. But yeah, that kind of details all that I'm going to do down here. We've got our original output coupling caps here. These almost always need to be replaced. If for no other reason than the voltage coming out of the wall is much higher than it was when this was built in 1964. And since anytime I've got to release the solder to replace these resistors, I just replace these guys too, generally. Probably put some Dijons in there. I don't remember what I've got in that value. Again, here is that one cathode resistor and cap arrangement right here, and this cap is backwards. Ground is on this side, as you can see, goes straight to the chassis. No capacitor should have its positive attached to ground unless it's in the bias supply, because that's what the bias supply does. So, yeah, that's an easy way to remember it when you're casting your eye across an amplifier and looking for little things, little mistakes, little things you might have missed when you're, going through stuff. That's a good way to remember it. All positives should go where they're supposed to go in the circuit, and negatives go to ground. That's the jack that's been installed, and you can see that it's a switching jack. That is for the tremolo circuit in conjunction with that pull knob to allow for using the amp and getting tremolo without needing a foot switch. I'm sure that's why that was done. Which seems okay, and if it works, honestly, I'm going to leave it in place. The original potentiometer is gone, as I said earlier, so yeah, it's not going to be such a big loss. Other than that, looks like all the pots are original. And so, yeah, this thing is dated 64, so I have some work to do, and I'll be back in just a second. All right, we have returned with the new filter caps installed. As you can see, I like to use these German-made F&Ts. I've just got years and years of experience with them. I've vacillated back and forth between a bunch of different brands over the years. I was using JJ's for a while and had a few of those go haywire on me. And F&T is the only capacitor that I use now. It's the only brand I use now because it's the only one, knockwood, that has absolutely positively never failed anytime I've ever put one in. They've always been fantastic. So we've got for the first node for the totem pole here, I went with the 100 at 350, which gives us a 700 volt cap, basically attached in series. Those 220K bridgers are underneath there. Those had been replaced and they were fine, so I left them alone. I also left these interstage resistors right here between the second and third and fourth nodes. right here. I left those resistors in place because they tested good. And the 3 other nodes here have been replaced with 22 UF at 500 volt FNTs. And those should be quiet, perform well, and help this thing be a studio rat, which is exactly why we're doing all of this work, to make it as quiet as possible. Did a fair amount of cleanup work in here. Whoever did the work previously did good work, but didn't necessarily clean up all the flux. I like to clean away excess flux if it's practical to clean it. It's not always practical to clean it up, but I like to get rid of it because it can cause problems down the line later on. And it just looks nicer. So there we go. Filter supply board is finished, and I'm going to move on to the work on the other side of the chassis. Stand by. All right. It is now sometime later. I believe I started this odyssey with this amplifier a few weeks ago now. Today is actually the 21st of August, and this old girl has been giving me fits the entire way. I'm kind of glad I decided to do a video of it, because it really does entail a lot of the meticulous stuff that you have to do sometimes with these old amplifiers. All right, we're going to start down here. First of all, I'm going to point out what's still here. These guys, the blue sausages right here. These 3 capacitors, this little one right here, 250 picofarad, that is your treble capacitor. This is your mid-range cap. It's a .022, and this is your bass cap rather, which is 0.1. The treble cap, not as vital, honestly, but these here blue sausages, as we call them, those capacitors are important to the sound of a vintage Fender, and it's imperative that they stay there. I'm willing to put up with just a little bit of swish out of the volume control, when you turn it back and forth, which is, if the pot's even clean and it still does it, that's probably DC voltage leaking back through these caps. I'm willing to put up with a little bit of that just to retain the tonal qualities of these caps. So it's important that these stay here. I've replaced these 100Ks in this area here. This is your normal channel slope resistor. Then the normal channel preamp plate resistors right here, which would be associated with that preamp tube up in there. Then as we move across here, this capacitor, not quite as vital. It's a coupling cap for the normal channel. Sometimes those need to be replaced before these tone caps. I'm willing to tolerate a lot of noise out of these. This one I'm going to be pickier about because it's not as vital. Up in here, let me see if I can zoom in some. Sometimes this thing will let me zoom, sometimes not. Here we go. Replaced all of this business in here. 1.5K resistors there. This first one is the normal channel first preamp cathode resistor in cap. And the second one is the vibrato channel first preamp cathode resistor in cap. And those are all very vital to the tone of the preamp in particular. It's good to have nice fresh caps in there. I like to use these mods from CE Distribution. I've been using them for a few years now and been real happy with them. I kind of like that they're silver, sort of like the Mallory's that we used to see in the 70s. They're real reliable. I like them a lot. Now you may recognize this from the first channel. This is your tone stack caps, or these are your tone stack caps rather, for the vibrato channel, bass, mid, treble. And again, we've left those in place. It's very important. And then you have your vibrato channel slope resistors right tucked in under there. These are all 100Ks. Vibrato channel preamp plate resistors are these right here. And those are all 100Ks. Replacing those from the stock carbon comps, those resistors typically get very noisy. And if you're having an amp that's quite noisy, a lot of times those resistors need to get jettisoned in favor of other new units here. I like to use these carbon films. I think they perform well. The noise specs are much better on them than a carbon comp, particularly an old carbon comp that may be starting to misbehave a bit. Vibrato channel coupling cap right here. And then normal and vibrato channel second preamp cathode resistor and cap right here. And let's see here. I've lost. Yeah, we've this arrangement of capacitors right here. I've left these alone from the previous work. I don't think these are original. Those are the vibrato or tremolos, it's more accurately called. This is the capacitor and resistance network. These three caps, these three resistors, and in conjunction with your optocell here, and this collection of resistors here, that's what's used to create the tube-driven tremolo. It's actually the oscillator, if you will, that that provides all that stuff. As we move down here, this pair right there is the vibrato cathode and resistor. Also, there's another one down here. It's the same thing. This is all part of the same network that governs this tube down here that handles your vibrato. Now, you'll notice there's some resistors I left in place from the previous work. This one right here and this one right here. This is the vibrato plate resistor, and these two are connected to the optocell. I left those in place. The circuit is working properly, and I left those in place because the optocell, I'm pretty sure this is not the stock optocell. I think it's been replaced. And once this thing's been soldered to once, it's best not to risk a whole bunch of additional heat to it. And these were testing good, and the circuit's working right, so I opted to leave those alone. There's very little else in the amp I opted to leave alone, as you're going to see. We come down here to the power section, or getting down to the power section. These guys right here are your channel mixing resistors, phase inverter coupling cap, and these are your phase inverter grid resistors on the outside. These two here, phase inverter grid resistors, and the phase inverter cathode resistor is in the middle here. These two are 1 meg. This is 470. And then tucked up in here, that is, what's the value? I'm looking at the schematic here. That is the phase inverter bias resistor, is this 22K right there. All of these are part of the power section, the output section of the amplifier. I like to use these metal oxides because I feel like they run cooler. I think they handle transients better. And as I said previously, this amp is going to be used in the studio a lot. It's going to be on for long periods of time. And this is where some cooling is going to be appreciated, and what these resistors do is going to be appreciated. You'll notice down here that also the phase inverter plate resistors, your 100K and your 82K, those are 3-watt metal oxides here. And then up here, the bias splitter resistors that are tucked away right up in here and here, the 220Ks, those excuse me, are 1-watt metal oxides. Drop my magic wand. I lose my witch license. And then finally, I did replace these output coupling caps. These were blue sausages. The stock ones are a 200 volt here, and this one's not. This is a negative feedback No, I'm sorry. That's not. It's the coupling cap for the negative feedback network. It doesn't have to be 630 volts. The original one was 200, but finding a good quality 200 volt cap that I like the performance of is hard. So I just use this one. It's going to be fine. And then, of course, our output coupling caps here. I replaced those. The blue sausages that came with it are 400 volt. And by the time with, modern voltages coming out of the wall being 125 volts in a lot of cases, as I'm looking at my meter, there's 119 volts coming out of the wall today. It is as high as 125 on certain days, particularly hot days like it is today. And so I like to overbuild this section a bit in order to tolerate those additional, punishment situations. Okay, now, while we're still on this side here, there's your original bias cap and resistor. I haven't touched those. And then if we move up here, well, let's move the whole thing a little bit. All right, let's see if I can get some light in here now. There we go. That is your bias supply right up in there. Capacitor, resistor, diode. You'll note that the capacitor has its positive connected to ground, and that's normal for a bias supply. This is the only cap in the amp, in just about any amp for that matter, that should have its positive rather connected to ground, because that's a bias circuit works with negative voltages. So I've replaced this cap and this resistor. All these good old RCA diodes are still cranking away. They're still working really well. Those diodes, when they're in good shape, I like to keep them because they were kind of overkill for this particular circuit. They're I think they're 1.5 amp diodes, unless I missed my guess. So they're plenty for this amp, and they all work well under tension. So there is the pilot light right there with the filament circuit wires connected to it. Now I'm probably going to have to move my position to go over. Well, maybe not. Look at this. I redid all of this wiring. This is what I resisted for a while and had to redo, and just kind of went through the whole blessed thing here. Essentially, after these filament wires, which come right off the pilot light, I've replaced all the wiring and everything to do with these sockets, the power sockets, that is, power tube sockets. Let's see if I can get some light that you can really see it here. On each one, all the wiring is new. Filament wiring is tightly twisted and brand new. This is your swamping resistor, or this is the screen grid up here. This is the grid stopper, as it's called, on the underside. 470 ohms, 5 watts up here. I call that a salt lick because it looks like a salt lick. If you were raised around farms or farm animals or anything, you probably know what a salt lick is. It's kind of a chalky white resistor, and I just call them salt licks because they look like that. You can pan over to the other power tubes here and see that I've replaced all of that wiring. It was just all misbehaving. Tube sockets were good. They were clean and in good shape. And I left the original filament wire from here on out. The original filament wire on these amplifiers is quite heavy, single core conductor. And the problem with it is you have really got to heat it up in order for it to make a good quality connection solder-wise. And I've seen a ton of these from the factory that have never been worked on before, where those filament wires are surrounded with solder, but they've worked their way loose over the years, and they're just sitting there and they're not really soldered in. It's my theory that wire is just too heavy for production work, because if you're working at speed like you usually are when you're producing something, you got to be able to move them down the line in a fair amount of time. And you've really got to heat that wire up to get it to solder properly. And I think they just kind of got a little bit careless in some cases. As for other wiring, the power cord had been replaced. I did not like how it was installed, so I redid it. Redid the ground right there with a correct lug underneath that nut there. Okay. White wire is running directly to the power transformer via that little tag strip that I used. It is not connected to ground. The tag strip ground is right here. It's not used. I like to use these where I'm doing stuff like this, where I'm connecting a wire to a transformer wire, rather than just, twisting them together and soldering them and putting heat shrink over them. This is going to hold it in place, and it's going to work out better. So then the black wire, I don't know if you can see it. I bypass the courtesy outlet, which is right here, and the polarity switch. They are redundant with a 3-wire connection. The black wire from the wall goes directly to the fuse right here. What that means is that absolutely anything that goes wrong inside this amplifier will trip the fuse. I want that. I want that fuse to blow. I want that level of protection at all times. So that's why I do it that way. And then the other side of the switch just goes over to the power switch. So yeah, that that was a lot of work, believe me. This thing had little ghosts inside of it, and a lot of it ended up being this power tube wiring, which I've straightened out now and gotten nice and clean and tidy and quiet. We're going to load this thing up with a completely brand new set of JJ tubes all the way across. And, I've already had it burnt in a couple of times, but found little problems and had to go back. On vintage amps like this, I'm kind of a sucker for leaving things as normal and stock as I possibly can. By the way, everything up forward is stock except, I think we mentioned this before, that's the intensity, I think. Yeah, the intensity control has a switch in it. And they have changed it so that the switch, or the jack on the back for the foot switch, actually interrupts that signal. So what that means is that without a jack plugged in, your switch is right there. As soon as you plug a jack in on the back, it defeats that, and it works just the way it should normally work. Cleaned up all my ground points up there. Pots and jacks and switches have all been thoroughly cleaned. But as I was saying a minute ago, I'm usually a sucker for leaving things alone. Sometimes it's just not practical. I mean, this is a 60-year-old amplifier, 60-year-old tube amplifier. And it does, they need maintenance from time to time. They do need freshening up from time to time. Components go bad, wires go bad, transformers, etc. In this case, I think our iron is all good. The major things have been taken care of. We have new filtering, new tubes, a ton of new wiring and components. This amp should provide wonderful tone for years to come. And it's still a black-face Fender. So it's, there's the things that I've done to it are really, this is art to me, but it's functional art. And it can't just look cool sitting in the corner of your studio. It has to perform a function. It has to perform it very well. So there are fine lines there that we all have to tread, but I'm pretty happy with how this has gone, even though it's been a bit of a trial. This is probably, well, not the worst. I've definitely done some bad overhauls here in the recent past, but this one proved to be a lot trickier than I thought it was going to be. I think it was stored poorly at some time. If you look right there at that screw at the end, you might be able to see where the eyelet board is actually cracked because it was tightened down too hard. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing, but when the amp is stored improperly, it will get hot and then cold and hot and then cold and hot and then cold. And that vulcanized fiber board, which is what that eyelet board is made of, can crack. It can start to do all sorts of weird things. It'll warp and twist and sometimes even pull itself completely apart. I've seen that too. But, all right. So what remains to be done here is some final testing. And at the request of the owner, I am going to let you hear what this thing sounds like. Okay, I thought I'd give you a little view from the other side of the chassis here. I've since plugged it in again and played it some more, and it was still having some issues. I ended up replacing the standby switch, which I probably should have done just right from the beginning. It was just acting nutty, not always letting high voltage through. There's your power tube sockets again from the other side. And phase inverter and the other preamp tubes. All that wiring is still stock. I ended up having to, earlier in the video I mentioned that someone had modified it and put a pot with a switch here on the intensity control to allow that to be turned on and off without a switch. Well, good idea in theory, but they did not use a correct pot. You have to use a 50K reverse audio for that intensity pot. And they had a 100K regular audio. So it was not working right. The taper was wrong, and the direction was wrong too. So I just yanked that out, put the correct 50K reverse audio intensity pot in there, and now the tremolo is working exactly as you would hope. Everything else is pretty well squared away and dialed in, and I'm pretty pleased with it. It sounds very big and bold and clear and black-facey. So yeah, at this point I will plug it in and let you hear what it sounds like. Good day, everyone. Welcome to another action-packed episode of Scooter's World. This is the tail end of this 64 Showman video that I've been working on. This little girl was a lot of work. She was all kinds of messed up. Some inflicted upon her. Most just old age. The vast majority of what was going on with this amp was just age, things needing to be, upgraded, solid core wire that just gets weird after, 60 years and all that sort of jazz. New tubes, new caps, all that sort of jazz. You can't see it. Well, you can see this. This is my 2010 Les Paul Standard that I've named Sarah. This is my E-flat guitar, so you'll note that I'm tuned to E-flat. I've been working the last couple of years on my Myth of Logic records, and most of that music I write on keyboards. And so it's real helpful to have an E-flat tuned guitar in addition to a standard tuned guitar handy at all times, because you never know when it's just easier to play on guitar. Certain keys for keyboards behave that way. It just makes it easier. It's not stock. It's got Grover tuners. Everything that I own gets Grovers. It's kind of one of my habits. We got some Dunlop strap locks. I did a complete rewire. with Gibson pots. The pickups are out of an earlier guitar that I had named Sarah that went down the line in favor of this Sarah. You see how I am? These are Duncans, Seymour Duncan distortion in the bridge and a 59 in the neck. And, the usual Gibson hardware and it's pretty close to stock other than the pickups, really. Anyway, I've got our friend, this Showman, running into, you can't see it, it's down here. It's my Granville 212 cabinet, the red one. You can see that in some other videos. It has, the speaker I have mic'd up with a Shure SM57 is a G12H30 greenback. And there's also a G1235CX on the other side, which is basically the same speaker with a ceramic magnet. And so that gives it an overall nicely balanced tone. I've had it for a number of years now. It was a gift from some very good friends, and I've been enjoying it immensely. I play it all the time. Matter of fact, play it practically every day with my Granville 20 watt. So we've got our good friend the Showman here. I'm plugged into the vibrato channel. I got the volume at 8.5. The treble is at around 4.5. The middle is around 6.5. Bass is around 2.5. We'll show you the tremolo at some point. I'm going to try and refrain from talking too much. For a little added dirt fun, I've got a Granville copper drive ready to go here when I'm feeling like getting a little dirtier. At some point, we'll switch over to the normal channel, although I've got them voiced so they sound pretty close to each other. My thought for studio use is that you voice the two channels very similarly, and then you have the ability to put different effects with an AB box to each channel. So you could have, say, an AB box with an overdrive and a delay running to the normal channel, and then you could switch over to the normal channel with, say, maybe a chorus and a reverb, and set them up appropriately so they go back and forth. Yeah, anyway, that's all of that. As you can see, it's got this wonderful swirly kind of a sound to it. I'm just going to play for a minute. There's our good friend, the old Fender tube-driven tremolo. somehow that riff just makes me happy. As you can see, it loves pedals. I'm finding that out. It's got the Fenderosity going. But as soon as you add a pedal to it, it goes, and it goes in a very pleasing musical way, I think. Cleans up pretty good with a pedal on as well. Oh, it's all in good fun, isn't it, kids? Okay, well, and then we're back to the regular sound. You have to be kind of judicious with the bass control on these old amps. The way they're voiced, they can turn into a mush in a big hurry. Usually I tell people to start with them completely off or close to it, and then just kind of goose it in till it's, once you get your level set, goose it in till it's just a little bit warm. If you try and crank the bass control on any of these amps, it's going to pass along low frequencies to your speakers that they can't hope to amplify cleanly, but they're going to try. And in trying, they don't always sound pleasant. So I'm always pretty sparing with my use of the bass control. Let's hear the normal channel. It's a little warmer, I think, maybe. I put a 12A Y7. All these tubes in it are JJ. I put a 12A Y7 in V1 of the normal channel just to kind of give it a little different character. It's less gainy tube at the front end. It's not a permanent mod. It can easily be reversed just by putting a different tube in. But it's got a nice character, I think. I'm in the wrong channel for this. And like I said, the owner is going to be using this thing for studio stuff. So we want something that's a good pedal platform. It's quiet as a church mouse, even cranked up. I mean, it's cranked right now, and there's hardly any background noise. And believe me, I worked hard to get it to that point. It's a little different with a studio rat. You want that noise floor to be as low as possible, because by the time you've plugged it in and got mic'd up and you're tracking, etc., obviously you don't want any weird noises or anything of that sort. But yeah, I mean, this little girl turned out real good. I'm happy with it. I hope the new owner's happy with it. He hasn't even seen it yet. It was shipped directly here by the reverb seller that he purchased it from. So, yeah, we got the overhaul finished, and it's finally ready to go out. So there you go. The 1964 Fender Showman amp. That's about all I got for today. If you have any questions or inquiries or complaints or anything of that sort, seek us out on the web at www.granvilleguitars.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. And the long-neglected blog over at WordPress, A View from the Granville Bench. I haven't added anything to that thing in years, but there's some good information over there if you're up for it. Anyway, that's all I got for today. Be good to one another.